Hello, everybody. Do this. Hello, hello. Welcome to the Nutrition Science and Diet Therapy session, preparing your students for the TSIC. My name is Heather Wade, and I'm glad you could join us as we talk through this course and the test of the TSIC, which can be kind of intimidating. So I have a co-host, Bill McNutt, that will be fielding your questions. And if you have a question anytime, just enter it into the chat feature and I will do my best to answer them. So just a little bit about me and my experience with this course. I have taught nutrition science and diet therapy for about 6 years. I have participated in all three pilot years of the TSIC, and I've had students for 4 different semesters take the test, including in the spring, my students took the test. I'm just going to kind of share with you how I approach the class, and hopefully we can work together and go through. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Just our agenda, some of the things that I thought were important to include is first and foremost, overcoming fear and intimidation. This class, in my opinion, is a very rigorous and challenging course. And so it can be very intimidating if you are not comfortable teaching this level of nutrition. Then I thought I would go through how I pace my class, some of the activities that we do that I have found to be successful for my students on the TSIC, some of the textbook resources that I use, and then online resources that I use, and then also just having a little section here so we can have like a little question and answer section. So first question that I have for you in the chat box, if you'll answer the following question: what fears or concerns do you have about the TSIC in general or teaching nutrition science and diet therapy? So I'll give you a little bit of time. If you have any concerns or fears, go ahead and enter those into the chat feature, and Mr. McNutt will let me know what you say, hopefully. Mr. McNutt, are you getting any questions?
I'm sorry. Yes, I was trying to leave enough time for response.
Right.
We've got first, Sarah Pfeiffer is asking, how can she possibly get through all of the standards in only an 18-week course?
Yes, so it is quite a challenge. There is a lot of content in this course. One of the things that I have found to be successful, and I'm going to talk about it in my presentation, is chunk information that goes together. It allows for a little bit more of a fluid movement throughout the class. Also, having the students take responsibility of their learning as well. They have to commit to you just as much as you commit to them. And so they need to understand that a lot of the work, not necessarily being homework, but a lot of the preparation for the exam needs to be on their own and on their own time. And I'll share a little bit about what I do with that. So that's a really good question, because there is a lot of content in this course.
We have 2 more questions that are related to each other. Faith Cogswell and Dana Strickland are both remarking that the TSIC is extremely difficult, and they're wondering that there's concern about the students passing and how to teach them.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I got that backwards. Veronica Walton is concerned about the low pass rate.
Okay, yes, I too am concerned about the low pass rate for the state. It is a very challenging, very, very challenging. And I believe the thing that we have to remember is they are receiving college credit if they pass the first time. So, you know, they have to make a difficult exam in order for them to be able to equate that to a college course. As far as the low pass rate goes, I also have had concerns about that. My students have actually been very successful on the exam in the 4 semesters that I have offered the exam. I've had 20 students pass, and throughout the state, that's not the case, which is why I was so excited to present this today, because I'm hoping, you know, I want all of our students to be able to have this opportunity and be successful. And I don't know that I'm necessarily doing anything different than everybody else, but I have found a method that seems to work well for my students. And I'm hoping that the strategies that I'm going to share with you will also help your students be successful. Good question.
There are a couple of more remarks about the rigor of the standards and making sure that students are well prepared and covering all of the material in the time available. In particular, however, Bonnie Stone is concerned about how in the world we are supposed to teach it virtually.
Yes, I agree. I actually continue to teach my 3rd level students virtually when school kind of just came to a crashing halt in March. So I taught them for 9 weeks and I had 5 out of 7 pass the exam. So it is doable, but once again, you have to make sure your kids make that commitment, because that was all on my kids, clearly. I've had very little to do with their success this semester because I didn't see them. And I was just sharing materials with them and, you know, conducting Zoom meetings and stuff like that. My fears and concerns are that in Knox County, we have a plan to go back to school. However, you know, that could change with our given situation. So I have diet therapy first semester. So I'm also a little anxious about, you know, creating that commitment from the get-go. I think it's doable, but it takes a commitment on your students and your part to do that. So I guess that's just one of those things where we're just gonna have to learn as we go.
We have one more area of concern from the participants. Melissa Standley reports that her nutrition textbook from 2004, she teaches the culinary arts course at the Tennessee Prison for Women, and she's hoping to get updated nutrition information here.
Yes, I have great resources that I hope to share with you. There is a textbook that I have found to be extremely successful, and I'll share that and the ISB number with you. And then there's another one that I've recently started using as well. So I'm actually going to cover that in this presentation as well. Great.
We've come to the bottom of the of the questions that folks have submitted for this slide. I will point out that this stuff rolls past me pretty quick. If I do miss anybody, don't hesitate to ask again. With that, I think we're done with the comments that come so far.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and move forward. If you have a question or need me to clarify something while I'm going through this, please feel free to enter it into the chat box. This is very informal. So the first thing that I had to realize when I was looking into the TSIC versus the course itself is that the standards align perfectly. So the state has done a great job of aligning these standards with the TSIC learning outcomes to match up with the standards. I have seen one standard in the course that it doesn't match up with, and that's the acids and bases standard, but you could cover that in digestion. So what I do is I kind of throw the standards to the side and teach to the learning outcomes because they're worded, in my opinion, in a more user-friendly way. They're more specific with what they want, their specific questions, and we know that that's the information that they're going to cover on the exam. So it's kind of teaching to the test, but if you remember that those are based off of the standards, then you're still doing what you're supposed to do. I just find the language in the learning outcomes to be a little bit more user-friendly than the standards. The state has created crosswalks that you can locate, I'm sure, on the state website. If not, I can send you that crosswalk that we've done in trainings before that align which learning outcomes go with which standards. So if you're looking at the standards themselves and trying to prepare your students for the exam, I would highly encourage you to look over at the learning outcomes more so than the standards, because those are the language that they've used to create this test. So just kind of looking at an example here, if you look at our state standard number 3 and the nutrient metabolism section, the standards say to illustrate major metabolic pathways that are used to produce energy for the body and explain the chemical processes in each stage, and catabolic and anabolic reactions. The learning outcome is not as wordy. So the learning outcome is telling you to define the following terms, which match up beautifully to the standards. And then when it tells you to explain the chemical processes that occur when glucose is converted to ATP, you are explaining those chemical processes through the pathway. Each of the terms that is listed go through the metabolic pathway. So you're teaching those pathways while you're teaching glycolysis, while you're teaching Krebs cycle, while you're teaching electron transport chain. And it kind of makes it, for me, a little bit easier to mark off, okay, yeah, we've mastered this standard, we've mastered this standard by looking at those learning outcomes. But you can see the wording is very similar. I just think that the learning outcomes give a little bit more of a simplistic view to the state standards. So that's how I approach them. I print off a copy of the learning outcomes every semester and I highlight as we go through them to make sure that I've covered them. So that lets me make sure that I am holding myself accountable to not only the standards, but the learning outcomes. Here's another one. I'll let you look at this one. The clinical nutrition assessments, standard number 18 for the state standards. It is having you basically go through nutrition assessment. There are 4 stages to nutrition assessment. Those 4 stages are listed in your state standards. So it just, once again, helps me simplify that learning outcome so that it's not so overwhelming, so overbearing for me to do that. And I just find it easier, like I've said over and over and over, I just find it easier to comprehend and understand the learning outcomes as opposed to those state standards. Then we'll move into pacing. So when I'm looking at pacing, I've always been told to begin with the end in mind. That's kind of been a mantra of multiple administrators that I've had. And so, in this case, you could look at a lot of different endings. To me, the TSIC is the ultimate ending, and how do I get my kids to the TSIC? So my goal for them is to combine learning outcomes that relate, but because the information is so complex, I want to ensure that I'm not overloading my kids with very, very difficult concepts to understand. So I'm going to look for outcomes that help students make connections to the content while pairing less complex material with more complex material. So a given week may have a really, really tough concept for us to understand, followed up with something that relates to that concept, but it's not as hard to wrap their head around. So an example of a week that I may have in my classroom is, when we're learning about diabetes. So I'm all about student ownership of their learning, and I love for my students to draw their own conclusions and make their own decisions and form their own opinions and idea of the learning for the week. So when we get into our medical nutrition therapy section of the course, we always start our week with a disease research project. So that disease research project may be on renal disease, it may be on cardiovascular disease. In the example that I have provided to you, it's diabetes research. So there are, I believe, 6 or 7 medical nutrition therapy diseases that are covered on the TSIC. So this realistically would take about 7 weeks of the course to do. So in this week, we start on Monday with a diabetes research project. The students do that on their own. It's usually in the way of a Google slide presentation. On Tuesday of that week, I will go in and lecture about diabetes. This also helps with the rigor because they've seen this material before in their research. So they have a baseline knowledge that they have taught themselves. And then I go in and reiterate the points, clear them up, you know, talk about whatever the topic is. So in this case, it would be diabetes. And then the thing that has changed the course for me are case studies. So they will do a diabetes case study where they have a client and the client has something going on, and they basically are that client's nutritionist, and they are working their way through the problem. And I'll share an example of that in just a second. Then I think, okay, well, what other learning outcome could go with diabetes? So we know that gestational diabetes can occur during pregnancy. And so I may cover pregnancy and infancy during diabetes week. So I'm now jumping on into that lifespan nutrition learning outcome. And so we may do the lecture on pregnancy and infancy. We may talk about it. And then I always do what I like to call check-ins. So the check-in would be a diabetes check-in. And it would just be a really quick assessment of, did you understand the learning outcomes? Did you understand the concepts of what we were going over? On Thursday, we would do a case study that relates to Wednesday's lecture and do a check-in that day. And then on Friday is our assessment day. So I'll assess you on what you should know for that week. And then because there's such a huge component in nutrition of what we eat, we plan meals for somebody that has diabetes type 1, somebody that has diabetes type 2. We plan meals for pregnancy. And then in this case, we wouldn't necessarily plan infant meals, but if we were working through toddlers or childhood or something like that, we would plan those meals for them then. So this is just kind of what a week looks like. So our new learning for the week would be diabetes, pregnancy, and infancy. That right there hits 3 of the learning outcomes in 1 week. And it combines that complex material with more simple material. So what each of these look like, this would be an example of our diabetes research project. So this would be just questions that they would need to go in and answer. They would need to provide their sources, you know, any sort of research that they would do. I don't want them to have to do a research paper on it, because that is going to, in my opinion, take away from their learning. So this is just introducing them to new materials, answering these simple questions. And these are questions that I developed from the learning outcomes. So reading these learning outcomes and having them basically learn those outcomes for themselves. Is there a question?
Yes. Faith Cogswell has asked that if you actually would have them cook something of their meal plan. It's something that she does, and it keeps them engaged.
You can, if you have the time built in, you could easily incorporate a lab into there. There's one thing that I make sure my students understand in 3rd level is that it is not like 2nd level where there is a lot of cooking going on. If you had the time and the resources, it would actually reiterate very easily that concept. But with my courses, I just feel like there's a lot of information, and it would just have to depend on how the semester was going. I typically teach 3rd level in the spring, and we typically get out, you know, 10 or more days for snow and flu and floods. So in that case, it probably wouldn't be possible for me to incorporate a lab like that into my week. But if the semester was going great and we didn't have days that we had missed, then I think that would really help with engagement and help the students kind of see the difference, because we have so many, especially with diabetes, we have so many misconceptions about what the meal plan needs to look like anyway. So that's a really good question. I would just see how much time you had in your semester to be able to do that. Okay, so once, yes, is there another question?
Sorry, yes, Faith was also asking where you get your case studies.
I get them out of the text that I'm going to show you. They're already pre-written and they work beautifully. You could obviously write your own. I've also had students write their own before too, but the text that I use has case studies at the end of every chapter. So it's nice. They actually have multiple case studies at the end of every chapter. So it's nice to already have those done for me. Okay, so then speaking of the case study, I have an example of the diabetes case study that my students would use. So let me pull it up here. Maybe. And this came from the textbook that I use. I should have changed these links over. So this would be the case study for our diabetes unit. So we're looking at Marie Claire, and it gives you a background of who they are, and then goes kind of into what they're experiencing. So my students, they would receive this, they would read it. This is an individual project that they would do. And then there are questions that they answer. So this also reiterates that nutrition care process, where they, need to know the different steps of nutrition assessment. So it reiterates that. So they would go through and answer these questions. And some of them are lengthier than others. So some of them are, some of them have a lot going on. Some of them have plates. So it's called Rate Your Plate. And you can actually go in and they can look at a meal plan for them and evaluate that meal plan. So this is an example of one of the case studies that I would do. Is there, I think there was I saw something with a hand raised. Is there a question? Is there a question going on? If you have a question, please put it into the chat feature.
At the moment, we don't have any outstanding questions. Oh, wait,
Okay.
Actually, there's a couple of raised hands.
Yeah, I'm seeing raised hands, so.
Here we go. Comazine Hines, Connie Staggs, and Dana Strickland. If I could get y'all to put your questions into the chat box, I will make sure that Heather gets them.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move forward, but if they have questions, I'll feel free to just interrupt.
I will certainly let you know.
Please do. All right, so then this is what a check-in would look like. So this would be after we've done, after they've done the research, after I have lectured, after they have done their case study, this would be their check-in. So I take my check-ins directly from the learning outcomes. So number one, compare the symptoms, causes, treatments of type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Number two, describing how manipulating carbohydrates in the diet affects blood glucose levels and the management of diabetes. So these are formative assessments. They're meant to gauge understanding and learning. They are not for a grade. My students understand that. And we discuss after we're done, because if they don't get it, there's not enough time with all the standards, all the learning outcomes. There's not enough time to, go back and make sure that they understand this. We need to understand it in the moment that we're learning it. And so I just take this, like I said, directly from the learning outcomes, and they'll write it out, type it out, however they want. It's on their own. But this allows me to say, okay, do you understand this learning outcome? Or do we need to go back and clarify? And there's a lot of material that we need to go back and clarify. I could foresee in this check-in that number two would be something that may need clearing up, because there's a lot of misconceptions about manipulating carbohydrates in a diabetic diet. So I want to make sure that we get it, that we learn it. Then, like I said, case studies. They're the game changer. I would like to also go back and say that when I assess my students, even though the test is multiple choice, I do not like a multiple choice answer to look for assessment and look for learning. So I make my test questions what I feel like would be harder than what they're seeing on the test, even though the test questions are hard. If you can answer one of my questions, which is typically, a short answer question, then you should be able to pick the answer out when it's staring you in the face. And that's what I always try to tell them. My school has a redo policy as far as assessments go, where they can, if they do poorly on an assessment, they can go back and do some sort of enriching activity, relearning, and then retake the assessment to get up to 90% on the exam. I have mixed emotions about that, but it helps in this class because it allows them to really, really see what they know without it being detrimental to their final grade, because they do have that redo policy in place at Carter. So as far as case studies go, like I said, I get my case studies from the text that I use. So I'll show you an example. This is very similar to the one that I just showed you. It's a different concept than what I had showed you before, but I wanted to show you an example of what a case study would look like. And then I have what a student's response to that would be. So this is a case study about Carl. He has Crohn's disease. So we would be learning about this with our digestive and gastrointestinal unit. So as far as Carl goes, it has, you know, all of your nutrition assessments on there. And then one thing that I did not mention before is that at the end of every case study, I have my students write a PES statement. So a couple years ago, I had the great opportunity to shadow dietitians at the University of Tennessee Medical Center for 2 different days. I got to shadow 9 different dietitians and see patients. And one thing that they reiterated was the PES statement. This is what they learn in their nutrition classes in college. So the PES statement is basically a nutrition diagnosis, and the P stands for problem. So they would need to state the problem. So in this case, you know, Carl, he has Crohn's disease. That is his problem. And then the what is causing that, the etiology of that would be, you know, what are the major contributing factors? And then what is the evidence of that? So the signs and symptoms of Carl's issues. So that is an example of the written case study that I would get to them. Is there a question?
Yes. Someone was wondering if you would be providing any case studies with the class materials.
I would be more than happy to provide any resources that you need. What I'm actually thinking about doing when I was teaching my students remotely for the last 9 weeks, I shared just Google folders with them, and they had all the material that they needed for that week in that Google folder. And then at the end of the week, we would do a Zoom meeting to discuss it. And so I am, I'm hoping to create a public Google folder with all of the resources that I use, because I really, really want students to be able to be successful and really benefit from this opportunity for them. So if it's something that you want pretty soon, I am sharing my email address at the end of the presentation, and I would be happy just to, you know, forward you a bunch of stuff. Or if you want to wait, and I'm still compiling that Google folder, if you want to just receive everything at once, I would be happy to do that too. So yes, I do plan on hopefully sharing what I have, because I think that that's how we all become successful, is we share what we have found works.
Okay.
So, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Sarah Pfeiffer has asked if you could give us more about your PES statements.
Yes, I'm actually going to show you the PES statement that a student wrote. So in this study, so remember Carl had Crohn's disease. I don't have them rewrite the case study. I'm actually starting to transition to a paper-free classroom. So I imagine this semester they will be able to write on the case study. But so this is a student of mine who passed the TSIC on the first try in June, and she received 3 hours college credit. She is a junior, and you can see that
hang on a second. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Heather. Yeah. They're not seeing your document when you go outside of PowerPoint. Could you make sure that that's sitting on top of the PowerPoint so that we can see it?
They don't see it. They haven't seen any of them. Oh, goodness. Okay. I'm not sure.
Sorry, I
know
was
how-
monitoring the chat and I thought it was
That's
a one-off.
okay. That's okay. Let's see. Maybe new share. And let me get Carl up there. I apologize. Okay, is that, are you seeing assessment?
Yes, now
at
we
the
see the
top?
case study. Thank you.
Fabulous, wonderful. I still too am learning Zoom just in time for my district to switch over to Teams. So, so this is, like I said, this is my student, Caitlin. She passed the exam on the first go around in June. So this is what they would do. I have them label the section. So these are the questions that they are answering from the case study. I'll go back and show you the original case study so that you can see how it's set up. But as far as it goes, you know, she's answering the questions, and these are coming from her, you know, her creative thinking and also the background knowledge that she has based on Crohn's disease or diabetes or whatever they've learned for that week. They formulate a plan or a goal. I have found this to be very successful because it puts them in the role of the dietitian. So they're thinking like that. To be honest with you, I have had several students who have come to my class wanting to do other professions. And at the end of the course or at the end of the program, they've actually decided that they want to go into dietetics, which is really cool. I have a student entering at Carson Newman who passed the exam who will be studying dietetics and nutrition in the fall. So they just go through and they answer the questions. So then the PES statement, so you can see Caitlin has said Carl is suffering from Crohn's disease related to his bowel movements, his flare-ups, and his constant pains that should be as evidenced by him having malnutrition issues and malabsorption. So the PES statement, it is an actual statement. So you state the problem related to, you put the related to words, and then what's causing the problem, what are the factors, and then as evidenced by, you know, what are those signs and symptoms. She could even reverse this and say Carl is suffering from Crohn's disease related to having malnutrition and absorption issues as evidenced by his bowel movements, flare-ups, and constant pains. I try not to get too picky in their wording because I want them to not feel as intimidating, as long as it's not completely off, you know, off topic or doesn't make any sense. I try not to get too, because they're not dietitians and they're not formally trained. So she's put in all of the information and seems to have wrapped her head around why, what's going on with Carl and why, you know, this is happening. So remember, the PES statement is just a nutrition diagnosis. So it would be the same as you being diagnosed with, you know, type A flu or whatever the case may be. Okay, I'm going to switch back over. Let's see if this will work. Okay, so let me go back and show you. I may have one. Let me go back and show you this case study since you were not able to see it before, just so you'll see what the case study looks like. That way you'll have a little bit of an idea. And like I said, this is, this comes straight from the book that I use. So this is what the case study that I would provide for them looks like. So it has the information. So you'll see Carl's a 30-year-old Caucasian male, and what their issues are. Sometimes it gives you, you know, medical diagnostics and things like that. But I tell them, if you don't understand something that's in the case study, it's your responsibility to go find it. So, you know, that also helps them get that research gauge in it and take ownership of their learning. So this is what a case study would look like. So it's got the questions, as you can see. And like I said, I just have them title the sections that they are answering. You could have them write the case study. They tend to keep the case studies with their responses to study by. But I just leave that completely up to them. So, okay. So, let me go back. Okay. So then I also have found that charts and graphics that they create have been very successful in the course. And one of the things that my students struggle with are nutrient deficiencies and excesses. So I created a chart very similar to this when I found out that one thing that my students were lacking was the ability to connect information. So from my understanding of this exam, and you know, we don't know a whole lot as educators about this exam because we can't talk about it with our kids, and you know, they just go and they do it. But my students seem to have problems connecting the material. So it's not just about learning what scurvy is, or it's not just about learning what osteoporosis is. They need to be able to connect that information because a patient's or a client's not going to come into your office and say, hey, I've got scurvy, what do I need to do? They're going to come into your office and say, you know, I've been bruising easily and I'm just so tired. And you kind of have to figure out what's going on. So this chart has seemed to work well for my students in understanding that. So we start with whatever the symptom looks like. So what would the complaint be? And then we go through and we look to see, okay, well, what deficiency might match up with that complaint? And then once we do that, well, how do we fix that? So if I'm bruising easily and I've got, I'm tired and my gums are bleeding, then, you know, I might have scurvy, and scurvy is a deficiency as evidenced by the downward arrow of vitamin C. And then what can I do to increase my vitamin C level? And so that's where those food sources come in. I have them research. So I give them scurvy, osteoporosis, pellagra, beriberi. I give them that information and I tell them that they need to find the signs, the symptoms, the food sources of how to fix it. Is it a deficiency? Is it an excess? So they do that research, we talk about it, and then they create this graphic to go in their study guide so that they can have a really quick reference of these deficiencies. So any questions over this? I also do one with structure of nutrients. So my biology teacher at my school is phenomenal, and she's willing to help me as much as she can. And so we talk about the structure of carbohydrates and the structure of proteins and the structure of fats. And so I have them kind of go back to their biology days and draw out those actual structures as they would have learned it in biology. And then we label those based on, you know, is it a monosaccharide, disaccharide, so on and so forth. So charts and visuals really help the students just be a really quick reference because they can get overloaded with words sometimes. So then I also provide my students with a study guide, a TSIC study guide. I give the study guide to the students 6 to 8 weeks before the test. And I give it to them in a notebook. I purchase notebooks for them and I give it to them in a notebook. They have to know that this is on them. They have to study outside of class. And so I really try to put that out there for them. I complete the study guide for them. And I know some teachers may have issue with that, but I want to make sure they are studying the right thing. In your, the resources or files tab, I have actually uploaded my study guide that I provide for them. Now, it's not an all-inclusive. They have to fill in the blanks sometimes with new information, but this just gives them a starting off point. And you are, I think you are able to download those files. I have also put this PowerPoint up there so you can download that as well. These are the resources that I use, probably the most important resources that I use. So this text right here is a game changer. The textbook that my county has adopted does not cover what we need to cover in the course, let alone for the TSIC. So this textbook right here, Nutrition and Diet Therapy by Ruth A. Roth, has been a game changer. I highly encourage you to find this. Even if you get like lower editions, so the 12th edition is the newest one. I have included the information here. I have found these at used bookstores. I have found these used online, but I also contacted the publisher and told them that I was teaching a nutrition and diet therapy course and would love to preview their book. They sent me the book, and it wasn't an actual textbook. It was just the insert of the textbook, and I just put it into a notebook. And so I used that. This is also another book that I have recently started using. This book right here is both of these are college level textbook, but this book right here is a little bit more intense. I would not share this with the kids. I would just use this as a resource for me. But this has information in it for everything you can imagine nutrition. This was suggested for me to buy by the dietitians at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, or University of Tennessee Medical Center. I would also like to say, if you're feeling overwhelmed with this class, the dietitians at UT told me basically every learning outcome that we have for the TSIC is its own separate college course when you're majoring in dietetics. So these two books right here, and like I said, I've uploaded the PowerPoint so you can get this information. You don't have to be crazy, jot it down, or just email me and I would be happy to share that. These are some online resources. CTE Online is fabulous. If you're looking at Khan Academy and Bozeman Science, please remember that nutrition is a science. And so you're going to look more for biology and anatomy and physiology lessons as opposed to nutrition and diet therapy lessons. And then any information you can get from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, that's also a great resource. And then I have also uploaded links to online practice tests. These are practice tests that students take for the RD exam. I find that having them answer these questions, even though they might not know the answers, is a really good way of getting them well versed in difficult questions to answer. These also have the explanation of why the answer is the way it is. So I love that they can read the explanation and kind of see the justification behind the answer. So we're almost out of time, so I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions, but before we do that, just in case it cuts us off, here is my contact information. If you want to email me, it's just heather.wade@knoxschools.org. And then I share a lot of what my students are doing on Twitter at Heather Vol. So if you want to follow me, you're more than welcome to. You can, I have several teachers throughout the state that have reached out to me through Twitter. They may have seen something that was retweeted or whatever. So you're more than welcome to follow me there. But email, I check my email on a regular basis and would be more than happy to share anything that you need. So if you have any questions before we run out of time, please feel free to enter them into the chat box and I'll try my best to answer them for you.
Okay, Heather, we actually have got a couple of items.
Yeah.
First, we had a request. They were wondering if they could plunder your Google folder. They were wondering if you would share that.
Yeah. I will share it with public view. So I would just ask that you make a copy of whatever's in there so that you can have your own a copy to manipulate. But I will definitely share that. If you want to, I don't know if you use Twitter or not, but I don't have the folder completely created yet, but I will announce on Twitter when it's done. Or if you want to shoot me an email that you want access to it, when it's done, I can email you and say, hey, here's the folder.
Okay, I have, let's see. Jamie Brown was just asking, do you retype the case studies out for your students?
I do. Because I don't want them to, I don't know why I do it. I guess I just have an issue with making a photocopy of a textbook, but I do retype them. Sometimes I leave information out because I feel like it's a little bit too above where we're trying to be. But I have every case study that I do for my students, I have retyped.
And we had somebody else, Dana Strickland. Do all of your students take the TSIC or do you choose the ones who take it?
The students that qualify, so they have to have intro and then nutrition across the lifespan and diet therapy to qualify to take the exam. But yes, every student, I do require them to take the exam. In our district, they get honors credit, or AP, weighted GPA credit for the course because of the exam. They also get grades or points added on to the end of their grade at the end of the semester for sitting for the exam. So I do. The only exception that I made was during the pandemic. I told them it was their option or not. And I did have 3 students this past semester that chose not to take it. But any other semester I do, they do take it, and I do give them the option to take it a second time if they don't pass the first time. I do not make them retake it if that's something that they don't want to do. Anything else?
I don't think there's anything else. Folks, it is possible that if you put a question in and it has not been responded to, that it scrolled past me as they came in bunches, occasionally really fast. If you have any questions that have not been resolved, please put it in. We still do have a little time left, and they will give us 10 minutes after time if necessary.
You can also email me your question if you think of something later. Please feel free to email me, because like I said, the more students we can have be successful with this opportunity, the better it's going to be for everybody.
Oh, right. I need to check the keyword for you guys so you can get credit.
So no, here it is. So here's
the
keyword for your survey. The keyword for this session is amazing. This nutrition diet therapy course is amazing. They actually chose that for me, but I think it's very fitting. Please keep in mind that this course is challenging and it's difficult, but it's also how you relate to your students and how you challenge them. And I think my students' success has come in large part from me just being very upfront with them about the difficulty of it. We've had many tears shared after the exam when we didn't pass. And those have been heartbreaking moments, but I truly feel like this exam prepares our students for life after high school. And I also feel like it makes them better learners. This is my favorite course to teach by far, just because I think this course gives us a more rigorous reputation as opposed to being home ec teachers. This allows us to show nutrition is a science, and in the state of Tennessee, they get a science credit for this class. So I really, really enjoy teaching this course, and the TSIC has just made it that much better. But make sure you enter amazing into the survey for your keyword.
Heather, I wanted to get you to confirm there are no capitals in that or anything. It's all lowercase, right?
In what they sent to me, it was as it is on the screen.
Okay, great.
Also, make sure that you go check out those files. Like I said, I've put the PowerPoint there. I've opened up the links in the PowerPoint to public view, so you should be able to open those up and see them. I also have shared my study guide that I give my students, and that page that has the online links to the practice test. One of the teachers in my district has also bought the RD practice exam text, just like you would have, if you were studying for the praxis, and she gives her students questions for bell ringers. I've not made that commitment just yet because they're quite pricey, but she has done that with her kids, and she has had students be successful on the exam as well. So I think just upping that rigor of answering questions helps our students kind of get to where they need to be.
Enthusiastic agreement from Jamie Brown. Agreed. We are needed and rigorous.
Yes. Yeah. I also find that it's important, just a side note, to talk to your administrators, talk to your counselors about this course, about this test, about how, challenging it is. I don't like the phrase dumping ground because I don't feel like any student is dumped into my room. But it is really important for them to understand, we welcome all students of all abilities into our room, but this is where the expectation is as far as learning goes, because the content is so challenging. Sometimes my counselors will, not have a student maybe take the 3rd level course. So I may not necessarily be their program of study, but, they take intro and then nutrition across the lifespan. And then I've also, I've had some students with IEPs and backgrounds do pretty well on the test. So I think our students rise to the challenge and the rigor that we put forth to them. One thing I also want to mention is that I hold office hours for my students the 4 weeks leading up to the exam. I set dates and times in the mornings and the afternoon to do one-on-one tutoring sessions. They have to come to me with things that are not making sense to them so that we can cover specific topics. But usually students that take advantage of those tutoring hours do really well. We also have had in the past a county-wide study session. So several teachers in my district in Knox County, we get together with our students. It's completely voluntary after school, but so they can get different perspectives from different teachers. Because sometimes, you know, we teach things in ways that are better understood for different learners. So those have also been successful if you're in a district with multiple teachers offering the exam. Anything else?
I'm not seeing anything else in the chat.
Okay, well, like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. You know, I hope we all get to have great semesters with our students and we can all stay safe and healthy. And I really appreciate you coming to this session and me being able to share with you. And you all had some really great questions. Hopefully I helped ease some of the fear and intimidation, and I look forward to a great year. So, and then thank you also, Mr. McNutt, for going through the chat box and helping me facilitate this session. I appreciate you.
I was glad to help.
All right. Well, you all have a great day and a great rest of your summer.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Okay.